Good afternoon, everyone. It's BJ back on your screens, and today we're going to be talking about travel. I asked for topics, and my niece sent in this request. She said she'd love to hear more about my travels. Well, I've traveled quite a bit, and it's going to take probably multiple episodes to go into just a fraction of my travel experiences, but I'll talk about some of them today. So, in honor of that, I'm wearing a t shirt from Salvador de Bahia. And Bahia is a state in northeastern Brazil, and it's known as the black province of Brazil. Of course, there are black people all over Brazil as a result of the transatlantic slave trade out of West Africa, but Bahia is the blackest part of Brazil. At any rate, let's talk about travel. So I was a young man when we started traveling to family reunions. My sister might remember this. We used to go to family reunions on my mother's side of the family in a small town in Alabama. And that's where we would see chickens get their necks wrung. And a couple hours later, the chicken was on the dinner table. And as city kids from the big city in South Florida, we didn't see that kind of stuff on a daily basis. And then on my dad's side of the family, we travel with my paternal grandmother up to a small town in southeastern Georgia. And we would go to their family reunion, and they had, again, it was a rural setting. They had lots of land, lots of small cabins and homes on their farmland. But the majority of the out-of-town family, we typically stay in these sort of log cabins at a state park. And that was a great experience. Relatives from near and far, first, second, and third cousins, people you only saw once a year or every few years. And those are great experiences. I hold fondly in my memory. I think they call those core memories, when you have something that is formed as a memory, a strong memory from your childhood. Moving along to my young adulthood, my first trip that I took independently as a young adult, I think I was around 20 years old. I was working full time, and there was a travel agency near my job. I made friends with the woman who owned and ran the travel agency, because back then, before the internet was, the big thing, you actually went to travel agencies to plan your trips. So I went to the travel agency. I worked with the woman. I believe her first name was Maria. Maria, if you're still out there, thank you so much for exposing me to my first big trip, independent big trip. And, I had a tight budget because I was young and not making a lot of money. But Maria figured out a trip for me to go to Jamaica. And I went to Montego Bay, Jamaica. I stayed in an area called Doctor's Cave. And I was there for 4 days and 3 nights. It covered airfare and the hotel. And I think I had a continental breakfast included at the hotel. And it was a great trip. It was my first time traveling internationally. This was so long ago, I'll give you a hint, that I didn't even need my passport to go to Jamaica, because at that time, I hadn't even gotten a passport yet when I was 20 years old. So I went with my state-issued ID, because I did not even have a driver's license at that point. I was not yet driving. I had a state-issued ID. I went to Jamaica, and I remember when I got off the flight, coming through customs, and back then Montego Bay didn't have a very sophisticated customs system. You walked up to a guy who was basically standing in a covered outdoor area, and he had a long slab of concrete. And I remember the guy, he looked at me, and I guess he was suspicious. Like, who is this young 20-year-old that can afford to travel internationally on his own? He asked me a few questions about, was I with anyone? Was I meeting family or friends? And I said, no, I'm here on my vacation. And I think something about that infuriated him. He took everything out of my suitcase and rammed through it, searched through it and threw it on the counter. And I guess he was looking for illegal substances, or maybe he was just angry because, that how dare me be so young and traveling internationally. Whatever the case might have been, I don't know. But then when he was done with it, I said, are you going to put my things back in my suitcase. He said, no, you get it, and then you hurry up and get out of here. That was my welcome to Jamaica. So, at any rate, the rest of my trip was pretty good. I was very young. There wasn't a whole lot to do for a young person my age. I went to the beach. I roamed around the local town, and I went to a couple good restaurants and things like that. I remember I went and I found a store selling dried beans and peas, and my maternal grandmother was still living at that time. So I bought some peas and I brought them back to her, and she said, oh, I've never seen these kind of peas. Don't ask me the name. I'm not a cook. I don't know what kind of peas they were. But she cooked them, and then she made them with some rice like she would have done almost any other beans in her southern, cooking repertoire. And we ate them, and they were delicious. So that was my first independent trip as a young man, about 20 years old. Later on in life, I started traveling around the United States. My friends and I would go to places like Atlanta. I used to fly to New York. There was an airline called Eastern Airlines that was based out of Miami, where I lived and grew up. And I would fly round trip to New York. I'd leave out Friday afternoon after work, and then I'd come back either late Sunday evening or early Monday morning, depending on my work schedule. And I literally would go to New York and party for the weekend. This was in the mid-1980s. Incredible. Nowadays, to do that kind of stuff, especially to go to a place like New York City, it probably costs you, a couple thousand just for a weekend. But I was very fortunate. I had a good friend who was an executive, a senior executive at a record company, and I would pay for my flight, and then he would help with the accommodations. I would either stay at his place, and sometimes he got a hotel for me. I can't go into all the details on that because, I don't know if the expirations on I forget what's that term. Anyway, I'm not going to go into details on that. But I used to have a great time. That's all I can say. I would go and party my tail off for 2-3 days, fly back, go to work on Monday. It was amazing. With that same friend, we also went on a trip to Bimini. Not Bimini, I'm sorry. We went to the Bahamas. We went to, I think it was called Grand Bahamas. And at that time, it was called Merv Griffin's Resort. Merv Griffin's Paradise Island Resort. So it was Paradise Island, that's what it was. And if you remember, those of you over a certain age, Merv Griffin used to be a huge talk show host back in the 1970s. And then he went into television production. I think one of his shows that's still on air is The Wheel of Fortune. He started that show many decades ago, and he may have even had his hands in Jeopardy, but he went into game show production. But I'm rambling, as I always do. So let's get back to the point. We went to Merv Griffin's Paradise Island Resort. This was also probably around the time I was 20 or 21 years old, and we had a great time. It was my friend had rented this townhome. He brought another friend with him, and we each had our own room. We each had our own ensuite bathroom. In the mornings, a woman that worked at the resort would come and deliver our breakfast, because every evening you kind of fill out a form of what you wanted to have for breakfast the next morning. And that was like a 5-star resort. I could never have afforded that on my own, but my buddy, who was a big-time record executive, he could afford that. So we used to have a great, great time traveling and doing things like that. At this point, I've traveled to over 30 countries. I need to sit down and make a tally. I think it's around 35 to be exact. I'm not 100% sure. I'll do a tally sometime in the near future and confirm for you guys, exactly how many countries I've been to. But I've been to places like Cuba. When Barack Obama was president, he eased the travel restrictions and reopened communications with the Cuban government. So for the first time in like 30, 40 years, Americans were allowed to travel into Cuba. And my friends and I, we had never been to Cuba, and I don't know why we wanted to go, but we got our documents that we needed to go, and we went to Cuba. And we loved it so much that in about a 3-year span, I went to Cuba 5 times. And I really like it there. I had said to myself, if they ever get to a point where they have extended friendly relations with the United States and their government is not communist, then that's a place I could live. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. The food is amazing. And what really fascinated me is that the Cubans that live in Cuba now are totally different than the ones that have come to the United States, especially the ones that live in South Florida where I grew up. The Cubans there were so kind, they were so friendly, and a lot of them were people of color, which also surprised me. So that was a great time in Cuba. I'm approaching 11 minutes, so I'm going to cut this off today. But in the next few episodes, I'll talk about travel some more. Places like Brazil, which is a place I'm planning to do my early retirement to. I've been all over Europe. I've been to quite a few Asian countries. I've been to South Africa, quite a few other South American countries. I spent some time in Canada. So I will be going into more detail about my travels over the next few episodes. If there are any specific places that you're curious about or that you want to know more about, leave a comment and I'll make a point to try and talk about some of those places. And so yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and please share. You know, I hear on YouTube that a lot of content makers say, hey, they can see that a lot of people are watching their videos but not subscribing. If you could subscribe, it does a huge favor for me. It doesn't cost you anything. And also, if you can share the video to people who you think might like to hear some of these topics, or might just want to hear a middle-aged guy rambling about the glories of his youth, then do that for me, all right? Until then, I'll be back on next Monday. Have a great weekend. Take care of yourself. And always remember that self-care is critical and must be ongoing. Peace. Now if I can stop this.